which
Recording in progress.
So sorry.
no worries, which basically means it's collected, it's sometimes sorted, and then it's processed, which usually involves grinding, shredding, baling it all into, a bale if it's gonna go to market. But then what happens to it? That's the question, right? So Circular Colorado has a contract with the State Enterprise Fund called Colorado Circular Communities, or C3 for short. It's an enterprise fund that is formed from a tipping fee at the landfill that is now $2 a ton. It goes into this fund, and what this fund is used for is to provide capital support and grants and loans and all kinds of good things to increase our recycling and circular economy infrastructure here in Colorado. So we have the contract to create, which we did in year one. We're now in our second year, the Circular Economy Development Center. Not our focus today. We're going to mostly talk about the recycling portion of circular economy, but I at least wanted to give you a quick overview. So what we call it the center. It is not a big building like this, but that name is in statute, so we're kind of stuck with it. We have offices. We have an office in Broomfield. We have staff that are located up and down the Front Range, and then we have two satellite offices. We have one in Grand Junction at the business incubator out there, and one in Colorado Pueblo area that is based out of a transload project we have down there. Transload meaning train, truck, different types of transport. We will open a third office this year, most likely in Durango. We're still working on finalizing that. All those offices have a 10-hour-a-week staff, and that's meant to give us like the on the ground view of that local community and their ecosystem. Because many of you know, as you travel across the state, we have the Front Range, and then we have mountains, rural, eastern plains, and those all have different demands. So what the center does is it works with the three, what we like to call the three legs of circular economy. So recycling, transportation, which is one of the main issues of why we don't have markets for these materials in Colorado, and manufacturing. So Colorado is essentially on a geographic island. We don't have any oceans, we don't have huge rivers, we don't have any ports. If you want to transport by truck, if you go to the west, you hit those beautiful mountains, and they're really hard to get over, and especially in the winter. So that makes transportation difficult to get to market. If you go east, you just keep driving, and it just drive. And the cost per mile is really expensive, anywhere from $2 to $4 a mile. So you can imagine what that costs. So what we're working on is to grow the manufacturing options here in Colorado and the transport options. That's what the Circular Economy Development Center does. So in that, we have lots of partners, and we've brought together a really nice panel for you guys today to kind of tell you what's out here and the state of affairs in recycling and composting. And then where these guys kind of leave off is where the center takes the baton and goes and takes these materials that they work on and gets them to market. What we ideally want to do in circularity is go product to the same product. Almost impossible with most things today. So what we're even looking for is other solutions, product to another product that at least can be captured again at end of life. Really important. If you go product to a product that only has one life left and then it ends up in a landfill, that's not what we're looking for, right? So we have EPR, which we'll talk about today, extended producer responsibility. Liz will talk about that a little bit. And, ideally you would take a bottle, so like a water bottle that you have, and go back to a bottle, but we're a ways away from things like that. But those bottles can be captured and turned into other products that can again be captured again at end of life as far as plastic. So we have a great panel today. We have Liz Chapman from Recycle Colorado, statewide nonprofit. We have Christy Turner from Scraps. She works on compost solutions. We have Nina Waysdorf from the City and County of Denver. And we have Charlotte Pitt from the Recycling Partnership. And what I'm going to do is we're going to go through, and each person is going to do about a 15-minute presentation or 10 minutes, tell you who they are, where they're from, and what they do. Really important for you guys in multifamily units. It's one of the not biggest, but bigger hurdles that we have in recycling as far as having infrastructure and resources for you guys to get your materials to these markets, right? It's very different than a single family household that wheels their cart just out onto the curb every week. So we're going to hopefully provide you with lots of resources to take with you, to use at your buildings, to help with your boards and your facilities directors, to help you understand a little bit more about the ecosystem of recycling and infrastructure and things that are available to you. Okay, so with that, I'm gonna turn it over to Liz Chapman from Recycle Colorado and let her tell you about what she does.
All right. So as Laura said, I'm Liz Chapman. I have been educating people about recycling for almost 15 years now. And prior to that, I specialized in educating people about all things sustainability and nature. So I've been in this realm of trying to get people to understand why we do different things to preserve both our own air and the earth. And this is just an extension of that work. Recycle Colorado,
Sorry,
that's okay.
working on it.
Okay, so in terms of resources, what you see here on this slide is recyclecolorado.org. Those of you that might have been paying attention, there was a time in our past where we were known as the Colorado Association for Recycling. So if you had heard of that, it's the same organization. Changed our name back when we had Lori at the helm, which was made it a lot easier for people to find us and understand what we do. So recyclecolorado.org has a whole bunch of resources on there in terms of what you want to know about the state of recycling across Colorado. We have a YouTube channel where we have webinars that dive deep into a variety of questions. We have events several times a year. Mostly what we do is serve our members. We are a membership organization, and our members are,
Oh, is it not working?
it did not advance.
Okay,
There we go.
there we go.
Our members are made up of a whole variety of folks, and you can see here we are at a bunch of different locations. I'm happy to talk about what we do with our members. Is we've got local government, we have private businesses, and not all of those businesses specialize in dealing with recycling or composting or landfills. We have businesses that join Recycle Colorado because they share our mission, which I had on the slide before, to keep material out of the landfill. And it doesn't necessarily mean that your business has to be directly related to that. But if you have a sustainability mission, if you want to create jobs, if you want to reduce your greenhouse footprint, recycling and composting is one of the easiest ways to support job creation in Colorado, as well as environmental protection and conservation. And Recycle Colorado does that in a number of ways. What you can see up here is us touring what's called a material recovery facility. We usually use the acronym MRF, like MRF, MRF. That's where this was a group of our members at a material recovery facility in the mountains. We also have round tables. You can see that in the bottom left corner. We get together and try and problem solve and say, what are you having a problem with? How have we solved this problem? What are we sharing? How can we join forces? We have several councils that specialize in that. This is us visiting a landfill. They claim to be the prettiest landfill in Colorado, Summit County. I haven't seen them all yet, so I can't say if they are or they are not, but it is a very pretty landfill. Then we support our efforts in rural parts of Colorado. The lower right-hand corner is me visiting a recycling facility down in La Junta, just outside of Pueblo, Colorado, where they are literally sorting the recycling by hand. Most of it's done by machinery, but in that location it is done by hand. And then in the upper right, you see me testifying at the the Colorado legislature. One other aspect that our members ask us to engage in is advocating for policies at the state level to help us meet this goal of reducing material buried in the landfill. And it is because of that work that I've been asked to be here today, because in 2022, Recycle Colorado joined forces with a number of other partners across the state, but we led the charge that resulted in passing what is called the Colorado Producer Responsibility for Packaging and Paper. Big, long title. Most places shorten that to the acronym EPR. And EPR stands for Extended Producer Responsibility. And the concept there is you made this water bottle, whoever made this, no brand. So
Hydro Flask.
Hydro Flask made this water bottle. I paid Hydro Flask for this water bottle. Cool. I drink it and then it develops a hole in it. Well, you made it, so I would like to give it back to you, and you are now responsible. Your responsibility extends now to the end of life of this object. And now you have to deal with what happens to it next. That's the concept behind extended producer responsibility. And it started in Europe over 20 years ago, and it started in Europe with big things like refrigerators and computers and ovens. They said, Maytag, you made this refrigerator, it's now done working, you have to come pay to have it picked up. And very quickly in Europe, they realized that Maytag started making their refrigerators in such a way that when they picked it up, they could use some of those parts to make a new refrigerator. And that concept has then grown. Our neighbors up to the north in Canada started producer responsibility for packaging to take the same concept, but have it applied to a soft drink can or a cereal box. And that's the model that we took in Colorado to make producer responsibility happen in Colorado. It has not quite launched yet. It became law in 2022. And we're in the process of launching it. It won't actually be something that most residents are aware of until 2026. And if you'll go to the next slide. So why did we do that? Because here in Colorado, we don't recycle well. This is a graphic I stole from the 50 states of recycling, and I'm going to leave it to my colleague to talk about the state of recycling beyond Colorado. I'm just going to talk about Colorado. In Colorado, you'll notice this diagram, and I know there's a lot of information here. What I want everyone to notice is that this is the 50%. And there's only one material that even comes close to being recycled at that rate, and that's cardboard. Cardboard is easier to recycle. There's a good market for it, and we get a lot of it from commercial locations. Unfortunately, a lot of people choose to throw away cardboard at home. You have probably seen it in your multifamily complexes, taking up all of the space in the trash bin, taking up way too much space in the trash bin. There's so much air in cardboard, especially if your neighbors do not break down those boxes. So we waste a lot of very valuable material by throwing it to the landfill. And one of the reasons that material ends up in the landfill, to echo what Lori said a few moments ago, is in multifamily complexes, in places where we have a density of people sharing a trash area. Very few of those trash areas were built with recycling in mind. Recycling also costs extra. So most property management companies are like, I don't want to pay that extra amount. We're just going to put it all into the dumpster. Well, part of the legislation passed for producer responsibility was to not only make recycling accessible to the people living in homes that wheel their cart out to the curb, but to make it equally accessible to those of us who share waste spaces because we live in apartment buildings or condos or densely populated areas. Multifamily units is the term we use most often to describe that when you have a shared trash area. And it's quite groundbreaking in Colorado to do that because none of the other legislation that we have made has impacted that segment of our population that represents a majority of where people live. Most people do not live in a freestanding home. Most people live in these shared complexes. So we wanted this legislation to address that, which did go this time. And we could talk for a whole hour about what is EPR, how does it work? We shall not. So I'm happy to answer questions, but I tried to break it down into some very simple points. And the idea is If you sell packaging, that's our law here in Colorado. It doesn't apply to refrigerators. It applies to consumer packaging. If you sell a product that comes in a package that any of us can go into the store and buy, you are obligated to pay into this fund that is going to be managed by what is called a producer responsibility organization. In Colorado, the producer responsibility organization that was selected by the state is called Circular Action Alliance. So many acronyms, so many names, there's not a quiz. There is a company that is in charge of this. Producers will pay this company a fee based on how many of these drinks do you sell into the state? How many boxes of cereal? How much dog food? Anything that we think of as buying, those are packages that are going to be part of this program. So they pay dues into the system. What's happening right now, as we speak, the producer responsibility organization, working with the state and an advisory board, is trying to figure out, how is this going to work? How are we going to make this legislation work on the ground? We don't know yet. We're having a lot of meetings. We've got a lot of ideas back and forth. We will get it worked out because the law says by February of next year, the producer responsibility organization has to have a plan. And we will launch forward, good or bad, changeable though it might be, we're going to keep going. The advisory board, which I serve on, helps to make sure that we're trying to bridge the gap between the government and the private industry. The advisory board is made up of people like myself that represent nonprofits. We've got composters, we've got haulers, we've got local governments on there that are all saying, oh, well, have you thought about this? And oh, well, that would work for me, but it won't work for them. So we're there to answer questions and poke holes in their plan in hopes that the plan they come up with by February is a good plan that we can all live with. And then what that means is beginning in 2026, the Producer Responsibility Organization, the PRO, will pay for all residential recycling in Colorado, whether you're a single family home or a multifamily complex. The Producer Responsibility Organization is on the hook for paying for the cost of recycling, not the cost of trash. And no one is required to participate. This is, people have to volunteer and say, I want to be part of the program. I want my recycling to be paid for, and then it will be paid for by that. You can go to the next one. So the things that the Producer Responsibility Organization has to pay for is the cost of collection and transport, which is huge. As Lori mentioned, the biggest cost is moving things around. What costs the most money in this system is to send a human in a truck to a place to pick stuff up. That's the money. Whether you send one human or 4 humans, doesn't matter. Whether you drive 10 miles or 30 miles, not as big a deal. The most expensive part is the truck, the fuel, the person to go from their headquarters to your place, pick it up and bring it to the proper location. So this has to, the Producer Responsibility Organization has to cover those costs. They also have to cover the cost of processing. So in Colorado, we have very few places that take what you put in your recycling bin and turn it into a new product. We have a few places that turn it into an intermediate raw material. Most of our stuff goes out of state, gets processed there, and then someone else turns it into the new product that can be shipped back to us. Hopefully, the Circular Economy Development Center is going to start to shift that dynamic and make Colorado a more attractive remanufacturing hub. But as it stands today, most of our stuff goes out of state unless it is beverage glass. Then education. So the Producer Responsibility Organization also has to pay for telling all of us, how does this work? They have to educate the haulers, the cities, the residents. Recycling, this is what you can put in there, and this is how you get it paid for free. They have to pay for that statewide campaign. And then they have to pay for infrastructure and improvement. So there are a number of packaging products that might get recycled in California or New York or in Europe, because those material recovery facilities, those MRFs, have better equipment, have more advanced equipment. So part of what the producer responsibility organization is going to do is improve that equipment here in Colorado. So over the next 10 years, we will be able to recycle more and more of that packaging that we buy off of the shelf. And go, next one. This gives you a bit of a timeline. So in 2023, the Circular Action Alliance was chosen. They finished their needs assessment last year. The needs assessment took a lot of back and forth, lots of delays, lots of politics, but it got approved in April of 2024. So then they started registering producers like Coca-Cola and Nestle and Unilever. They've got almost 2,000 producers registered with them so far, which is not all of them, but we've got the major ones registered. And then that February, we're in between that October 2024 and February 2025, or October 2024 is coming up, the deadline to register. And then they're working simultaneously on that plan. We're having lots of meetings. We have meetings twice a month or 4 times a month right now, trying to figure out what is this plan going to look like? How are we going to get paid? Who's going to get paid? What will they get paid? And then in August 31st, they're going to start next year, they're going to start collecting money. And then in January of 2026, they're going to have enough money from their dues to start paying for everybody's recycling. So that.
In a nutshell?
That was it in a nutshell.
So we're going to go through the panel and then we have a whole last part of the session for just questions and answers. If you want to write them down or just keep them there in your head, then we'll go through those at the end. Okay, next we're going to turn over to Charlotte Pitt from the Recycling Partnership.
Yep.
Great resource.
I'll give you a chance, give Gabrielle a chance to pull up slides.
Thank you.
Thanks. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. So my name is Charlotte Pitt. I am the Director of Grant Development for a nonprofit organization called the Recycling Partnership. We are a mission-driven nonprofit. We mobilize people, data, solutions, technical assistance across the value chain to help make recycling work. We are a national nonprofit, so we work across the country. And we really look at how to increase access. There are lots of parts of the recycling system that need to happen, but our focus is on all of it. But access is a key part of that. I can go to the next slide. Because less than half of the recyclables in US homes are getting recycled today. And that really is the mission that we are trying to work on and trying to improve. So I want to give you a little bit of background about residential recycling in the United States, just to give you some perspective. First of all, we know there are 5 things that need to happen to make recycling work. People need to have access at their homes to put their recyclables somewhere. People need to know how to use that access properly. They need to know what materials to recycle, where to put them, which containers, and when. They need to go to the sorting facility that Liz mentioned, the MRF, and there needs to be the technology to sort those materials into their separated materials section. There needs to be end markets, which Lori was talking about, that want that raw material to make something new out of. And then the packaging that all of that comes in needs to be recyclable, which was what Liz was talking about with the EPR. The more regulation on it, the more likely the packaging is to be recyclable. So those 5 things need to be met to make the system work. And so far across the country, they are not always working. One of our cornerstone publications as a nonprofit is called the State of Curbside Recycling. And every couple of years, we update this report to take a snapshot of what's happening across the country. As you can see in Colorado, we are only recycling 14% of the material. And this is just the recyclables. It is not organic material that is available to us. As you can see, the states that are performing better than Colorado are still not performing particularly well. The highest are California, Oregon, and I think those are the two highest on the West Coast. So there's lots of room for improvement. Next slide, Darrell. And then when you drill down, as Liz and Lori both said, curbside recycling at single family homes is pretty accessible. But when you look at multifamily homes across the country, we think that only about 37% of those units even have access. Now, that doesn't mean they're even using that access, but it means it's available in some shape or form. So it's just a little bit of background for you. Next slide. If you're interested and you're a data geek, feel free to download a copy of this report. It's only 36 pages and it's really easy. So shameless plug. So let's look at the system opportunities when we talk about multifamily. It's a complex issue. You've heard now two people say that recycling in multifamily is complex. And I just wanted to outline a couple of reasons why. First, lack of service. It's sometimes really hard for multifamily buildings to provide that service. I've been working in this industry for a long time, and not only are all multifamily buildings different, we sort of classify multifamily as 4 units or up. So from a 4 unit to a multi-hundred unit building is very different. And then you look at age of the building, you're going from, hundreds of years old, no, not 100, but old in some places like New York City, to brand new. And so the concept of recycling and waste generation and the volume of material that we create maybe wasn't thought of along the lines of when that building was developed. Then we come across things like not just space limitations, but safety. Where is it? Is it in the dungeon of the basement and it's dark? Is it outside? Is it next to something that's doesn't feel safe? So lighting and then multiple uses. Then you take a multifamily building and you put a diverse community in that building and they do things differently. And so you see contamination. Someone thinks the plastic toy is recyclable when really it's only the plastic bottle. And then you have the challenge of communicating to your residents. And sometimes that can be in multiple languages and multiple ways that you need to reach people. Sometimes it's digital, sometimes it's face-to-face. You also have sometimes a more transient population, people moving in and out as leases turn over. So that it is a very complex issue and it's one that has not been solved for yet. You can go to the next slide. And so what we do as an organization is we work directly with communities across the country. We support them with technical assistance and grant funding in an effort to develop some best management practices. We are a 10-year-old organization and we started with single family curbside access. We've delivered about 500 grants across the country to understand the difference between providing, a drop-off center for single family to a curbside bin, to a curbside cart, to weekly collection, to curbside collection with good engagement, followed by curbside collection with good engagement and policy, to sort of figure out what works best. And we know that a cart placed at a single family household with adequate size, meaning 65 gallon or 95 gallon, is the way that you capture the most material. So we have started now for the past couple of years to look at multifamily properties and to try to understand what different levels of service can do and what different results you get from that level of service. We have not figured it out, but we're making progress. We know that the average single family home has about 800 pounds of recyclables available per year to recycle. We think the average multifamily home is about 75% of that. So just a little bit less than 800 pounds a year. And that's how we measure the success of our programs. So far, what we're understanding is that the location and the type of service you deliver is key. We are testing in communities across the country and collecting data on the value of in-unit collection bins or bags. And then we are testing different messaging on how to really communicate what is and isn't recyclable and how to do it properly in buildings. And then we've been looking at also service levels, to understand how that impacts behavior. So, we've also been testing consistent education. Like you have to talk to people more than once a year. So it needs to be clear and concise. This is talking about this is about example of a valet service. Where their bins are collected outside their door, but this is like just an example. Next. So we have been testing this with communities across the country and we've been providing some grant funding to support it. It's just a couple of pictures of in-unit bins. And this is just another sampling of some of the material that we've produced. We do have on our website a guide to multifamily recycling. We worked with the city of Orlando and Tacoma, Washington to look at some best management practices. On our website, in addition to this, you will also can find a sign builder and a campaign builder, where you see those icons that say recycle, thank you for recycling these items. We have some self-service resources that you can go in, answer a few questions like, do you accept glass or do you not accept glass? And you can plug in a logo and it will produce some signs if you need adequate signage in your building, along with things like door hangers, reminding your residents of what can and can't be recycled. And those are all accessible to anybody in the room. If you go to the next slide. I'm gonna talk just a little bit about our grants. This is definitely unique. We typically grant communities and we are looking for large scale projects. We try to make our grants as low barrier as possible because we're really looking to learn from them and to collect data. So we have a line of grants right now. We look at recycling carts for single family homes. We provide grant funding for drop-off centers for rural and urban areas. We do multifamily access. Anytime we can get new access to recycling for multifamily buildings, that's very interesting to us. We do MRF improvements, engagement, and then data collection. As I mentioned, we really look for new access, new tons, and then we're also looking to help clean up the stream. We want better tons of recyclables. I think the rest of those are not really applicable to this audience. So next slide. These are some of the things we have funded in multifamily buildings. We typically don't like to fund staff. We like to fund infrastructure. So things like enclosure development for recycling bins, trucks and trailers to pick up recycling, carts, dumpsters, in-unit bins. We've been testing valet service in San Marcos, Texas, and a couple of other communities recently. And then signage and mailers. We really want to make sure that education is always a component within our grants. So anytime there's an infrastructure grant, we also grant education and outreach. We try to make our projects simple. Like I said, we typically don't grant just a building. We want to grant like a number of buildings. We typically are working through communities and granting multi-thousand units at a time. We have a year-round application. We typically do reimbursement grants and we support with a project manager to make sure that we're capturing the data that we need to capture from projects. But I duplicated that. We are a nonprofit, but we are funded by, we have partnership in our name because we are funded by a large number of private corporations that are funding our mission. And what we are able to do is help sort of insulate communities from getting direct funding from, say, corporations. And so we pool that funding to make it available to communities. And if anyone's interested, we are so new in the multifamily granting world that We don't actually have an RFP on our website right now. We consider any multifamily grant to be custom. And so we work to collaboratively build those grant projects with communities or with groups of private organizations. And so if anyone's interested in projects, they'll have to give me a call or send me an email. And that's it. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thanks, Charlotte. So again, we're just here to provide hopefully a whole suite of resources for you guys and for CAP, and their buildings. So next up, compost. Christy Turner from Scraps. So compost is a little bit different than bottles that are more inert than like a banana peel. So I'm just gonna tell you how that works.
A little bit different,
A little bit.
easier in some ways, harder in others. So interestingly, I worked in this building as my last job before launching Scraps 7.5 years ago. So it's really interesting. It's great to be here and come full circle. I see a couple of faces in the audience who have been customers of ours since the very beginning. We have grown quite a bit since we started. I'm going to try and give you a brief overview. When I started the company, it was actually out of frustration with the lack of access for folks living in multifamily units in Denver. At the time, I think I lived in like 4 different apartments and condos, bouncing around, trying to figure out where I could stay and where I could afford. My last home, which was now before I moved out to the suburbs, was actually a cat managed building now. And I remember being that person in the trash room, breaking down boxes and looking at the security cameras like, trying to make things work. Started Scraps as a very targeted, small scale, sort of test of an idea that if we thought outside the box and used a very different form of transportation, very small scale form of pickups, that we could at least capture, we could provide access to composting in the downtown Denver market where we had the most density of multifamily buildings. We did that by starting the company. We ran our routes on trikes. Back in the day, before there were really any options for multifamily unit composting, I had seen some examples in other states, other sort of growing cities like ours that maybe had a growing population. Like we already heard, multifamily units are where most of the population lives in Denver. At the time, we were seeing an explosion in the population growth in Denver. I think at one point we had like 5,000 or 10,000 people moving here every week or something absurd like that, cramming into the multiple multifamily units that were being built. Some of you at the table were working for city government at the time, trying to get more access to recycling and composting to at least the residential sector. As is already been mentioned on the panel, MFUs were not on the table. So, from that small start, we've grown quite a bit. We sort of moved away from servicing individual units in multifamily units this past year to align ourselves more with the waste no more ordinance that Nina's going to catch us up on. And now we provide service to full multifamily units around the Denver area, city and county of Denver and beyond. We also service actually about 80% of our customers are in the commercial sector, non-MFU commercial sector, technically in the commercial sector. And we also service single family homes in the suburbs of Denver where there isn't municipally provided composting. We have more than 2,500 Scraps members. You can see some of what we provide to our Scraps members to really focus on making composting something that folks can do sustainably for ideally easily at home and at work. You can go to the next slide if you'd like. Quick primer on composting. We've heard the word recycling quite a bit. Composting is simply organics recycling. So organic meaning anything that grew, not certified organic, but organic matter. And the process of composting is simply attempting to imitate the natural process of decomposition. It's essentially managed decomposition. The finished product, compost, be a little confusing sometimes. We say we put our compost in the compost bin and then buy finished compost in a bag and put it in your garden. It's technically two very different things. So finished compost is a soil amendment, decomposed organic matter that can be added to the soil and produces all sorts of benefits. I won't read those to you. One of the things that had really sort of frustrated me and motivated me to quit my job and start a little company triking around Denver picking up compost is it's a really easy, adoptable, scalable way to contribute to the fight against climate change. Every bit of organic matter that we prevent from going to the landfill is a positive for our fight against climate change. One of the sort of shocking things that I learned actually in the course of my work here at the Alliance Center when we were partnering with the city to promote their 2020 sustainability goals is that landfills are the third largest source of human caused methane in the United States, which was shocking to me as someone who thought she was pretty informed on what happens when you throw an apple in the garbage instead of in a compost pile. And composting is something that everyone can do. It takes a little bit of innovation to figure out how to do it in a multifamily situation, how to do it in different commercial situations. But it's absolutely adoptable, much more achievable than say putting solar panels on your roof or purchasing an electric vehicle or investing in infrastructure to have a positive climate benefit. And of course, it is pretty soon going to be something that is universally required across the resident or provided across the residential and commercial sector in Denver, which is really phenomenal. Thinking back, obviously we still have a long road to hoe in terms of recycling all forms of material and including organic material in Colorado and in the Denver area. But it's pretty fantastic to see how far we've come and how even the concept of composting is something that property management companies, HOAs are interested in and aware of versus terrified of or woefully misinformed about. Had some very interesting conversations with property managers back in the early days when we were trying to get approval to service our very first multifamily unit residents. There were some property managers who seemed to, and HOA members, general public, who seemed to think we were asking if we could dump a pile of rotting food have them pay us for it. So we've come a long way in the regulatory environment where we are kind of on the threshold of really, really major changes in our composting sector in our circular economy in Colorado, but just in basic education awareness and desire for more composting. You can go to the next one. A little bit more about our personal journey or my Scraps' individual journey. Our first pickup was June of 2017. You can see one of our original scrappers driving that trike across that bridge over there. I'm a suburbanite now, so I don't remember the names of things. But yeah, you can see it took us quite a bit to hit our first £1 million mark, and now every 6 to 8 months we're collecting another £1 million. So we're hitting a point where we're really focusing on maintaining our dedication to servicing, educating our customers, supporting them, providing them with tailored solutions, no matter what type of customer they are. Still really stay true to our roots, especially as Waste No More comes into play in working directly with property management companies, HOAs, residents of multifamily units to really help create composting access solutions that work and are tailored to all those different scenarios of buildings that Charlotte was talking about. And we expect to we're probably going to hit 7.5 by the end of the year. We'll see. Next slide, please. So just a little bit more about us and Waste No More, and actually probably Nina will touch on all of this. We've spoken mostly about recycling, but again, with both EPR coming down the pike and waste at the state level and Waste No More at the city level, organics recycling / composting is implicated in both of those, still kind of TBD on the EPR front, and definitely going to be required once Waste No More is at full implementation. So we've been really excited to be part of that process. And yeah, we're excited to see where the future takes this city, and our state as these regulations that we've talked about and others come into play. So.
Great, okay, thank you. Okay, Nina is gonna, I think everybody's heard a lot about Waste No More. Number of us sat on the task force, which was super informative, but had a lot of people on it. It's a lot to organize. So Nina's has been gracious enough to come and bring us an update, kind of an insider update a little bit, but also what's available to the public, but can sometimes be hard to find.
Yes, absolutely. So I'm actually gonna talk about two different but related, similar programs that are happening within Denver. So my name is Nina Waisdorf. I'm the Waste Diversion and Outreach Manager for our Solid Waste Management Division. So that is where the residential haulers for City and County of Denver. So within transportation and infrastructure. So we service small multifamily buildings, 7 units and fewer, and all of the single family homes in Denver. We don't service the larger multifamily buildings. Who picks up your waste? So this graph just kind of shows who does what. So on the residential side, we have a program called Expanded Waste Services, or Pay As You Throw, which provides access to recycling and rolling out compost service to all of the entities that we service. On the commercial side, that's serviced by private haulers. So multifamily buildings, most relevant to this group, multifamily buildings with 8+ units. So I'm going to speak a little bit about each one. My understanding is that Waste No More is most relevant to this group because of the 8+ unit entities. However, my understanding is that there are some communities here that may fall under our services, primarily townhouse communities. For the most part, we service townhouse communities because each one has its own own door to the outside. So that makes it a single family home in our book. However, there's some exceptions to that. So I'm going to try to touch on both Waste No More and Expanded Waste Services. So to start Waste No More, a couple of caveat prefaces. You'll see throughout there are a lot of still to be determined aspects of Waste No More. So some questions that you may have, I may not be able to answer yet, or the city can't answer yet. So apologies in advance. I'm going to try not to make it more confusing, but it might be somewhat inevitable. Similar to EPR, as Liz mentioned, there is a lot to be worked out with how to actually implement the ordinance as written, both from a code perspective, like what can the city in its jurisdiction enforce about Waste No More and how, and then also how can the city support multifamily buildings, small businesses for sure, to reduce the barriers for implementation. So there's kind of a couple of different things that are still being worked out that I'll touch on. Also, my second caveat is that Waste No More is actually being implemented and kind of led by the city's Climate Action, Sustainability and Resiliency Office, or CASR. They gave me the information to kind of share on their behalf. I've been involved with the task force and some of the kind of city side of it, but there are also maybe some cases where it's like, I'm gonna push that answer off to CASR. So. Okay, so just the origins of the Waste No More ordinance. If you are not familiar with it, it was a ballot initiative, a citizen-led ballot initiative on the 2022 ballot that is intended to provide access to all residents and people who live and work in Denver, as well as special events and construction demolition projects, provide access to recycling and compost. The reason why is historically low rates of waste diversion, as a number of us have mentioned, that has been identified as a pain point within the city and within the state. Just one quick thing on this, I'm probably going to gloss over a lot of this because so much of it has been covered by these wonderful ladies here. But this was passed with 70% of voters on the 2022 ballot. So certainly something that has been it's on top of people's minds within the city. So these are the ordinance requirements as written. Both important to point out, covered entities are multifamily residential buildings with 80+ units, so again, that's relevant here, as well as non-residential commercial buildings, permitted special events, and permitted construction and demolition projects. There are some additional requirements such as providing education, annual diversion plans, some more administrative sides of it as well. But the core of it is to provide that access to on-site recycling and compost. So this is the timeline as written. If you were doing the math in your head, the ordinance was put on the 2022 ballot in November, but some of those dates had already passed by the time that it was put into effect. So as is city statute, city law, it is in the code, in the Denver Revised Municipal Code as written. However, in order for us to update, implement, enforce in any way, some things like the dates need to be updated. So it'll have to go back through city council in order for that revised code to be updated, and then we can kind of go from there. So that's one of the major things that the task force had to kind of sit with, work out, and then what city agencies are now working on. So as was mentioned, there was a Waste No More task force convened in 2023, really to hear from all the different stakeholders affected by this ordinance. And that goal is to try to clarify, try to figure out how it should be implemented and how it should be enforced. So from there, oh, sorry, no, that's good. Yeah, or you can, sorry, skip that one. Oh, yeah, there we go. So there were some major takeaways from that. Primarily, people want this. There is a large, folks in Denver have indicated very strongly that they want access to these programs. However, Denverites also want to make sure that it's implemented equitably, so really focusing on reducing some of those barriers. And that's a big question, as it's mentioned, especially for the commercial sector. It's a challenge. It's not quite as simple as what we do on the residential side. Next slide. So from there, now city agencies and the mayor's office are kind of taking those recommendations, tweaking them for them to go back through city council and be updated and implemented. So although it is in effect, there is no enforcement being done on behalf, from the city. So it is I would recommend that all properties begin, if you're not already recycling, composting, at least begin looking at what that would take. But we're not going to come banging out your door telling you that you're not compliance yet, but we will. Yeah. Next slide. All right, so that was the Waste No More side. Again, still quite a bit to be determined, but that's kind of the goal. On the expanded waste services side, or pay as you throw, go to the next slide. Back in so long ago, early 2023, we switched to this program called Expanded Waste Services. So the city now, on the residential side, now charges for the size of your trash cart. You can choose small, medium, or large. But recycling, compost, and some additional services are included at no additional cost. And then we are adding in compost access to all of our customers. It was formerly a subscription, a fee-based program just for the compost collection program. So now we're switching that fee. We've switched that fee from the compost to the trash. The goal of that is to incentivize waste diversion, right? So rather than saying, here, you can throw away as much as you want for free, we're saying you have to be a bit more conscious about the trash that you throw away, about what you send to the landfill, rather. But we're making it more accessible to recycle and compost. So that's the goal of it. You'll notice access quite a bit for both of these. So again, just as was mentioned previously, the goal of these programs are to create access to waste diversion. We can promote it all we want, but if folks don't have an easy way to recycle or compost, it can't happen. So both of these, from different angles, are working to provide access to waste diversion. Yeah, there's a lot of potential. Denver, been said, we have very historically low diversion rates, even compared to similar municipalities around the country, municipalities within Denver or within Colorado. So these are meant to provide that access. You can skip that. So just a quick plug. If you are one of our customers, this is what goes in your recycling cart. I'd be remiss if I didn't share that. Next slide. Here's what goes in your compost cart, similarly, if you have compost service. If not, you'll be getting access to it soon. And then just as importantly, please don't put these things in your recycling or compost carts, primarily plastic bags. And then my quick plug, especially in conjunction with our friends at the Climate Action Office, waste reduction and prevention still really important. So we love recycling, we love compost, but looking at ways to reduce your waste is always going to be most sustainable. Then you can skip a few more of my PSAs. And then here are just some more resources if you have questions about either of these programs.
All right.
And that's that.
Great. Well, thank you all so very much. We're right on time. So I think now we're gonna go to a question and answer. We will integrate online. Maybe Gabrielle, the best thing would be to do is you could manage that and tell me when online has a question and we'll interject or kind of go back and forth with both.
Yep.
And we can go till 6. We can go as long as you have questions up until then. Or if you need to, want to come and eat dinner early, that's okay too, if we run out of questions, but, everybody up here is a wealth of knowledge. And is really, really helpful and can help even after this. So it was really important for us to bring them and get them in front of you and all the buildings that CAP participates in. So with that, are there any questions? I'll take in the room first and then we'll go to online. Yes, please.
Thank you so much for all the information, ladies. So I kind of give a background as to some solutions. I had studied abroad in Berlin, Germany as part of the pilot program with CE Denver with the sustainability program. And we were also housed in multi-unit family buildings. And what I remembered how they effectively did the recycling over there was they started teaching recycling to those of pre-K. So really, that's when it really begins. And then also the units, I remember we had to save everything that we purchased. So we saved our water bottles, we saved our glass bottles, and then from there, it was up to all of us to be responsible to bring it downstairs into the unit. And it was like a garden gathering. So everybody had to basically go downstairs and basically drop off everything into either waste, glass, plastic, or compost. And if you had messed up, like you heard it from the whole community. So it really did take the entire community to make it work over there. And all of the units were essentially built out like that. But it was really effective and they had one of the most immaculate like recycling and trash facilities ever. And I just wish that Denver would also do programs of bringing back glass bottles and plastic bottles into grocery stores. I think they do it in the East Coast. I don't know why they don't do it here in Denver. And also, there was one other thing I wanted to suggest. I forgot about it.
Why don't we talk about the redemption, because that's a hot topic. I apologetically sometimes come from California. It's a while ago, but still. And we call them a bottle bill or redemption,
Yes,
collect them, get
yes.
5 cents.
Yeah.
I'm gonna let Liz take that because that has come up a lot here in Colorado.
So thank you for going abroad and bringing some of that wisdom back to the US and to Colorado. And before I jump into that, I do want to say there is a community in Colorado, Boulder, Colorado. Their voters agreed to tax themselves and they start that education quite early. Kids in school learn how to recycle, and as a result, Boulder has one of the highest recycling rates within the state of Colorado. So what you're saying we have evidence for is possible to do in Colorado and works. It takes money to fund that. Boulder chose to tax themselves to pay for it. Not everyone in Colorado is in a position to do that or is willing to do that. But we certainly have evidence that what you observed could work here as well. And that early education is key.
Can I interject on
Yeah.
that, just on that, before you go to bottle bills?
Yeah.
So solid waste, just a quick plug, we are the haulers for the Denver public school system as well, and we do education in schools. It takes a lot of resources, we're a very small team that does it. However, if you're parents of any kiddos or know any kiddos in a Denver public school that would benefit from our education, you can send them our way. Provide that education. So it's a bit of an as request basis right now.
Fantastic. So in terms of the redemption, something that studies have shown is that if you pay people to bring bottles back, more people bring bottles back. I mean, it is a very common sense conclusion that the research backs up. If you say, I'm gonna take a 10-cent deposit, you bring it back, I'll give you your 10 cents, more people bring it back. Not 100%. You tap out at about 60. So you get 40% of those bottles do not make it back, even though there's a redemption. So it is not the one size fit all magic solution, but it certainly would jump us up from our abysmal 14%, to 60%. That would be amazing. There's a number of things that hold that back here in Colorado. One of those things, to go back to what Lori started us on, is it's so expensive to get that material to the places it needs to go to be recycled, that it would be a really high deposit to pay for the system. So, and that would mean that you as a consumer, it wouldn't be an extra 10 cents, it might be as high as 75 cents. And that is a burden on the consumer that the Colorado legislatures would not even consider. That is just far too high. If we can bring that cost down, that might open up a door to that possibility. What you see on the east and west coasts is they're so close to those processing centers because they're so densely populated. They can cover the cost of the program for a low redemption or a low deposit of 10 cents. And it pays for itself because they have that massive amount of people and they don't have as far to move materials to get it recycled. So it's hard to replicate that, not just in Colorado, but in all of middle America. All of us spread out Midwest, Western states, we have that transportation piece, which makes this problem much more expensive to overcome. And we have less material to redeem. So we've got the worst of both things happening, right? We don't have that massive, what is that word I'm looking for, where you have massive quantities like wholesale, where we're still at a retail level. And you need those massive quantities to make the system pay off and keep the fee low enough that we as consumers are like, okay, I can afford that 10 cents and I can still buy the thing I want because I'll get the 10 cents back. If you make that fee too high, well, it doesn't matter that you're gonna give me the money back because you've made it too high for me to make the purchase in the first place. But there's another element that I want to touch on. In other places, years ago, when they passed these redemption programs, part of that legislation was you retailer, if you sell this product, you are mandated by law to take that product back. You must be what we would call a redemption center. That's very expensive for a retail establishment. And I haven't looked at the square footage prices in Denver, but I'm pretty sure they're extraordinarily high. So what you're asking, or what you're mandating, is this retail establishment that is paying hundreds of dollars per square inch to devote several feet, if not tens of feet, to something that they don't make any money off of. So the retailers in Colorado, every time this discussion has come up, they have objected to that on the political level, talking to lawmakers and making their legitimate case. This would cost us money. And so that's one of the reasons it has stopped and not that conversation hasn't gotten very far in Colorado. That being said, those redemption processes are evolving with the times. Technology is coming in. We're finding ways to make redemption centers without requiring retailers. We're finding ways to make redemption centers so that it's easier for us, the money, instead of having to take your bottles, feed it into a machine, get a little piece of paper, take the piece of paper in, get the money. We're now at a place where you put the bottles in a bag, scan a code, the money's in your bank account. So with that sort of technological advance, it is freeing us up, and that conversation is starting again in Colorado. I would not be surprised if 5 years from now, you will see this getting discussed at the State House. So that was extraordinary.
Want to take that question?
Yeah. I can read it. Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, and when you combine EPR with bottle return, you get like dramatic.
So it's hard to say in the US. So what Christy's referring to is there have been a couple of reports that have come out in the last year that show when you pair, so I said earlier that the redemption value tops out at about 60%. There's still 40% of the bottles that are part of the program that never make it back to the program. If you pair it with an EPR program, you can get that redemption, you can get that recovery rate, the number of bottles that come back into the system, up into the 80 and 90%. If you have both systems in one place. Having EPR alone also tops out between 60 and 70%. Having recycling refunds or bottle deposits taps out. You have both things in place, now you're getting, nowhere gets 100%. There's always some that escape the system, but you get closer to that if you combine the two. What gets a little tricky is that's all data based on outside of the US, because Colorado was the first place to pass EPR, and none of the places that have EPR, or none of the places that have bottle bills also have EPR, right? So projecting based on what's happened in Canada, based on what's happened in Europe, based on projections, it looks like we could get to that 80 to 90% of the material back if we had both things. And that is a report that just came out this week or this year.
Okay, want to go to the online question? I think it's a good one.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and read it out loud. So Megan online says, as a resident of a multi-unit building, I don't have control over whether non-recyclables get mistakenly placed in with recycling. I often question whether our mixed recycling bins truly get recycled at all, and if I should even bother to separate my recycling from trash. Can you speak to how much of mixed recycling actually gets recycled? And does contaminated recycling get recycled at all?
Who wants that one?
There's always a loss through the process, but the recycling system is built to handle a certain level of contamination. We expect to get the things that are not on the acceptable materials list in the recycling cart. I think the critical thing to answer this question is I would say the people in the building need education, and they need to know like clear, concise, and multiple touches around what can and can't be recycled to try to alleviate that problem. I would also ask, is there adequate trash collection in that building? Because if you don't provide adequate trash service, people are gonna walk down to the wherever they take their trash, they're gonna find the trash dumpsters full, and then they're gonna put it in the recycling bin. So there's two things that happen. If you put the correct materials in the recycling carts, those materials will make it to the end process. What is typically pulled out is the things that are not on that acceptable materials list, and those will not typically be recycled because they were never supposed to be there in the first place. So I think that's probably a fairly concise answer.
Can you list some ways that TRP has learned to reduce contamination in multifamily circumstances?
Sure. We have learned, again, adequate trash service is first and foremost, continuous engagement with your community. We have found that in-unit totes or bags with either a fridge cling or a magnet, or I think I showed a picture with the materials listed on the side. are great ways to manage that. In some cases, we have seen, separate areas. We don't necessarily like separate areas because it takes the access, it doesn't make it as convenient. Different containers, and it depends because the multifamily buildings are different, right? 8 units is different than 200 units. Signage on the containers, signage behind the containers typically works. But really engagement is a critical piece.
And I'm gonna jump in there, and I told Gabrielle this. So Circular Colorado, a couple years ago now, did a pilot in Brooks Tower, which is on 15th Street. It's an older building. Some of you may all know it. It's condo. And they had lost their recycling due to construction for a number of years. So it was like never having recycling because, the transition of residents. So we initiated a recycling program there, took a room that was only 12 by 14. That had these 2 little dumpsters in it, and I will share a picture that Gabrielle can share out, but we actually made it fob access. And in order to recycle, because people wanted to recycle, we put them through like an 8-minute webinar. That was at 8 minutes. And what we taught them was the economics of recycling. So it's very important, all the signage and everything, but what's even more important was for people to understand why you don't want to contaminate is because it devalues the material. And if you devalue the material, right, you're not going to get anything for it. And if you don't get anything for it, then how do you pay for these trucks? That what they didn't understand is when you see that trash truck drive around, how many miles a gallon you guys think those get?
4.
Between 4 to 7, unless you're CNG or you're brand new, but most of them are not, right? And then you've got 1 or 2 people on that truck, and what do you have to pay for wages and benefits? And then it has to go to this thing that we call a MRF. And then it's got to go through all these belts and all this kind of stuff. The good part about that is for every ton of trash that gets processed out there, it goes to a landfill, it creates 1 job. For recycling, creates 9 jobs. So that's a huge economic benefit, right? But when you throw your soda bottle full of Coca-Cola or Pepsi or Sprite or water or anything in without dumping it out, and now it contaminates and it devalues the paper and the cardboard and all those things, it makes it really hard to make something that already costs money make more sense, right? So it was that education even on glass too here that we explained them. We have a closed loop here in Colorado, you guys. One of very few states. If you get your bottle in a recycling container in Colorado, it goes to the MRF. What's left over looks like a big pile of dirt. From there, it goes to another process that we have, called glass to glass now, that reprocesses that into a cullet that then goes to either Rocky Mountain Bottle Company out here in Golden Wheat Ridge area, or another place called Owens, Illinois, up north near Fort Collins, that makes that back into a bottle. Within 3 weeks, that glass is back on the shelf in a new bottle. Almost no state has that. We collect less than 30% of the glass in Colorado. And all you need to do is get it in that cart. So we tried through education, this is what goes in here and why. This is what doesn't go in here and why, right? And here's how this becomes worth so much more money that will help, over time, make recycling not cost so much if we don't have to separate so much of it out. So really important to learn that, and, for buildings to teach their residents that, yes, it's environmental, it's huge, climate change is real. I mean, the heat and all that, but it's also economic, right? It has to do with jobs, it has to do with keeping materials in our economy and not putting them in our landfill. So another important part of education there. Other questions?
There's one more from Megan as well. Will the new consumer packaging law apply to marijuana products sold at dispensaries or only other consumer products sold in regular stores?
So it depends on the amount of money. There is a $5 million exemption. So if you are selling packaging and your revenue is less than $5 million, you are exempt. And we have so many small operators in the marijuana industry. My understanding is the majority of them will be exempt.
Okay,
Great.
thank you.
And any more in the room here? So we'll go back and forth. We'll go here and then there if that works.
I have a question in terms of education, because the kind of education that you're talking about, I live in an over 340 unit multifamily. And the management, on-site management has sent out email after email. And we actually, as an HOA, get fined for any contamination. And that has been made known to the residents, and yet we still have the problem with people not breaking down boxes or people throwing plastic bags into the recycling. And my concern is also that once we start, let's say my hope is full service composting for our building, that is going to be an issue as well. And one of the things, we already compost a small group with scraps. We have about between, 45 to 50 composters. But these are really dedicated people. They either have composted when they live in their single family homes or really want to compost. And scraps has been terrific because anytime there's been a question, we've gotten answers. Yes, egg cartons are compostable. The toilet paper, once the toilet paper is used, is compostable. I have never been able to get really good information from our recycling hauler, waste management. There's nobody to contact and say, is this number really compostable? I mean, recyclable, etc. So where do big multifamily buildings get education from? I mean, our management has gotten education for fire prevention, using the fire extinguishers, this kind of thing. So where can Deshauna, who can Deshauna contact to get that kind of really in-depth education on both recycling and composting?
Who wants to diplomatically answer? We all know this is a struggle in our industry. Like, we're gonna let Christie diplomatically answer that.
From a personal standpoint, and I want to say Wei Shen has been with us since we were like 3 crazy girls in a tricycle. Issues, I mean, you guys are driving like Brits into your tiny little garages where the lanes like impossible turns, and we have had an amazing experience working with you and your HOA and cat management, previous management companies, less so. So on the recycling side, one of the things that we're really excited about with Waste No More is, part of what the city is expected to be providing is essentially an online place where folks can at the very least download signage that is, if not universal, at least covers the bases of what any hauler should accept as far as recycling is concerned. Right now, we're still only working with 2 MRFs in Denver, so it's all going to one of 2 places. So there's that to look forward to. Ideally, possibly, once 2026 hits, EPR comes online, being able to get actual physical signage in all sorts of forms or educational signage in all sorts of forms will be, paid for through the EPR fees. I think another piece that I frequently return to is kind of that the personal decision-making sort of flow back or circularity in all this. I think, we've talked broadly speaking about recycling and commodities and high value recyclable materials such as glass, cardboard, to a lesser extent, aluminum. And then there's all sorts of different types of plastics. I think it's no secret that there are some plastics that are really high value. And then there's all the smaller, thinner, kind of just garbage plastics that really still don't have a good solid foothold in the circularity conversation around recycling. It's, I mean, Lori, the whole panel's talked a lot about how essentially it's an economic equation and it costs more to reprocess the material into a new product than it does to just throw it away. No one's going to invest in that. So on the personal level, ideally that leads individuals to do what they can to reduce the amount of needless or avoidable types of plastic in their purchasing decisions, however possible. Obviously, that is a long road to hoe. But a potential solution could be to decide to just like focus on the big three in your recycling room. Like, okay, we're just gonna do cardboard, glass, and aluminum. We're working on a project at the Denver International Airport right now. We have a zero waste valet team that's working with concessions, and we're starting this very simplified approach as we reintegrate composting, recycling, and minimal landfill disposal to 37 concessions across the beat concourse. So perhaps in the meantime, just simplifying the messaging and sticking with what's high value, what's really recognizable, kind of going back to the days when we all source separated our recycling, like still happens in countries that are further down the road than we are. And then you have just a clear, simple message that isn't going to change. I don't think we're gonna stop accepting cardboard, glass, and aluminum.
And that's what we did at Brooks, and the residents at first were like, well, why can't I just throw everything in here? That's exactly what we did. We did cardboard and we did all beverage containers. So everybody knew what a glass bottle was, everybody knew what a water bottle was, right? It's not a number, blah, blah, blah. It's did it have a beverage in it? Here, everybody knew what aluminum can was. The beauty was after we explained the economics, and we said, you can throw all of those types of beverage containers into any of the one carts that we had there, about 10 carts. Instead, the residents separated the glass, they separated the aluminum, and they separated the plastic because they understood that the value is higher if it was separated. So then I took those pictures, I sent them to the gal who was on my board at the time who ran the MRF, and she's like, I don't even need to run this through the MRF because it's so clean, right? If I could get all recycling like that, then it wouldn't need to go through all the belts and the sorters and all that. So like what Christy's saying, but it's all an individual choice, and you got to make the systems easy if you want to get critical mass adoption, because not everyone cares the same.
Because right now it is so,
It's so confusing.
It is confusing and it is so complicated. So
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah, it is. But then when you're trying to get everything and you have the signage, I used to do a workshop a long time ago when I worked for a company called Recycle Bank about the psychology of waste. So you have, and you guys have all heard me say this, right? You have these signs and it's great. It's like recycle these 45 things. Don't recycle these 35 things. These 28, we're not really totally sure. So human beings, we want to be successful, right? And we have egos, and we have all of that. And so it gets really challenging. And this goes back on the manufacturers and all the folks that are making things out of a million different types of materials. And that's where it starts. But now here we are, and somebody looks at this and they're like, I'm not gonna win. So they're either just gonna say, screw it, and excuse my term, forget it and not do it at all, right? I'm either not gonna, since I'm not gonna be successful, I'm just gonna throw it all in the trash.
Yeah.
Right? And so it's just that we have to work on, we've made it so complicated. We being everybody, manufacturers, waste companies, everybody, so it makes it.
Well, that's why I think the EPR is really great.
Yeah.
To put the burden back on the manufacturers, because it's like, why do I have all of this packaging
Mhm.
for one little tiny thing?
Right. But then with what we have, like Charlotte and Nina and what everyone's talking about, you've got to also just saturate it with education and signage for what we do have. Like, even if you decide we just want to recycle these things, you still need that communication and signage.
And Lori, we've simplified some of
Yeah.
that messaging
Right.
with the images that we use and the simple instructions like empty.
Yeah.
And it's an image of bottles,
Yeah.
and broken down
Yeah.
cardboard. So
Pour out, yeah.
we've tested that in multiple communities, and what we found is if we keep that consistent, it's helpful. You can put a different message on the front, you can personalize your message on the front, but if you go to the back and you see the images and the clear instructions with maybe 4 or 5 no's, like what are your top contaminants? Plastic bags. We know across the country, plastic bags are the biggest contaminant in every city, not just Denver, and so you can say no plastic bags, like that's an easy one.
Yeah, yeah. Let me, back here, well, I have him ahead of you, please, thank you, and then you next.
Mine's a little less related to residential, so if there are questions that would be more, relevant to the panel, but I was just wondering about harder to recycle kind of, materials like cement, steel, when you talk about building your home and where.
So construction, we call that C&D, or construction demolition. I used to run a roll-off here in Denver and worked a lot on construction and demolition. And that's another whole portion of the waste no more ordinance. Doesn't technically pertain to this. Concrete, very recyclable, right? Metal. It's actually scrap, it's not recyclable, but very recoverable and has value. The things that we have a hard time with is drywall. Once it's been put and you put paint and mastic and all of that types of stuff. Shingles, Circular Colorado works a lot with shingles and drywall, gypsum. These ceiling tiles, we're getting ready, I think, to launch a huge program, Circular Colorado carpet tile recovery. But it's tough because construction and demolition weighs a lot more than a plastic bottle. And it weighs a lot more even than, a bucket of compostables, right? And the markets have to be local. You're not gonna put that on a truck and ship it, out of Colorado. So if you're interested in that, I can give you my card afterwards. So much is about educating the contractors, and then you have to have ordinances and things in place that require them to make available space for the right receptacle for that stuff. But then even if they do that, it has to have a place to go. And we lack those markets today, right? If you have wood, say you deconstruct this building instead of demolish it, which means you methodically take it apart, you still have all this lumber that has nails and screws in it. Those all have to come out. And it's a really laborious process to do that. So construction and demolition is fascinating. We do a lot of that at the Circular Economy Center. And so I can give you those resources after too. You bet. And in the very back, there she is. Yep.
Yes, I just had a question. I apologize. I don't remember your name. You were talking about the grant program.
Yeah.
And so I know that you said that you don't really focus on the human piece of it, but to Way's point, that's what I've been trying to see if there was some type of conglomerate that could provide the level of education personally. So is that something that's encompassed in the grant? Or how do you, and then also I needed to give your information because they're moving by so fast. So
Absolutely, it's on the slides and I have some cards. When I said we don't focus on the human piece, we don't typically like to grant staffing. We like to grant infrastructure and then help the community or the buildings make the staffing piece sustainable. We can't grant staffing year over year. So that's the human piece I was talking about. We will do some stop gaps if there's some timing on getting something in place, but we know if we fund that, it tends to go away. But we do focus on the human piece of the education. We work directly with our grantees to figure out what the best method of engagement is. We typically, again, will support with some of that collateral messaging and then leave it up to our grantee to work on the personal piece, but we certainly help evaluate what's going to be the best method for you.
Okay, great. We have more online. Was that helpful to you?
yes,
Okay,
yes, it was.
okay. Wonderful, thank you.
Okay, yeah, so there is one question from Ron. He asks, who is the responsible party in a multifamily residential condo specifically, where the units that generate waste are individually owned, but there's collective ownership of the common elements such as the trash rooms?
Please, yes, Nina.
So for the purpose of waste no more, at least, the responsible party would typically be whichever entity contracts the waste services. So typically it's an HOA. For commercial businesses, that's gonna be a little bit different, but for this audience, it would be the HOA.
For Ron's question, I know Ron.
So for this case, it would be the HOA. There may be some exceptions built in or exemptions where if you are self-hauling, that was written into the ordinance. It's a little bit trickier to administratively, to administer. There we go. But typically it would be the HOA for this.
Okay, another kind of waste no more related one. Oh, sorry about that.
Oh, that's okay. Okay.
Under waste no more, any clarification as to whether or not the HOA will be required to pay for global access to all residents regardless of their participation, or can HOAs enter into a single payer contract with scraps? For example, according to those signups, individuals then sign up with the HOA and bill only the individuals who have signed up with the HOA. I.e., would this arrangement meet the waste no more ordinance?
So generally speaking, I can't answer so specifically because it hasn't been exactly decided yet, but typically recycling with this and with EPR, recycling or the diversion action has to be at least as accessible as trash. So if you are providing large scale trash service, including your HOA, and then charging individual homeowners for a smaller compost service, that would likely not be under compliance. But there may be some more details in the final ordinance language, but generally speaking, it's to provide at least equal access.
Makes sense. We'll take the question in the back, please.
So I have a two-part question. My first one is, with composting in Denver, I understood that put egg cartons and toilet paper rolls in compost anymore, but then we discovered that you can't. So what?
Do you want to text now? So shortest answer, but I feel like we're going buddy up. So different processors. So just like recycling goes to a MRF, we send Denver sends the organic material we collect from curbside carts. We send it to a processor to make that into finished compost. So our processor sets the guidelines. Our processor has said food scraps, yard debris, and 3 gallon or smaller CMA certified bags are accepted in the curbside carts. However,
Yeah, we use a different processor. We used to use the same processor that the city and county of Denver was using when all these changes happened. But essentially, once the expanded waste services passed, there was a lot of really legitimate concern from the region's major processor that once hundreds of thousands of homes got compost carts delivered to their back door, if they hadn't read the memo, hadn't paid attention to the public education campaign, or the public education campaign had failed to reach them adequately, then they would be facing a tidal wave of contamination coming to them. So what they did in response was to say, from now on, we're only taking yard waste, food waste, 3 gallon CMA certified bags to really try and minimize the level of contaminated material that they would ultimately have to deal with. And really valid concern. There's lots of examples in other parts of the US where maybe the rollout of universal composting services did lead to excessive amounts of contamination, and the processors weren't prepared to take that. So we used to take our material to the same processor, and due to our size, our volume, and our really stalwart commitment to educating our customers, we provide free/mandatory training for all of our commercial customers, ongoing support. We've invested in driver training, software that helps our drivers identify compost, send an email to the members, contamination fees, all of that. They granted us a small scale pilot, they called it, to continue to bring our material to their facility. That pilot eventually went away, and we're currently taking our material to a different facility. We, at the time, like many small haulers, really fought to be able to keep compostables in our stream, compostable products, whether that's fiber that is 100% cellulose from trees, or paper products, or whether that's CMA certified, CMA approved manufactured compostable products. That's a whole other conversation as to why it made sense for us to really push to keep that open. But now it's admittedly confusing when the messaging can be different if you're a customer with one hauler versus a customer with the city or another hauler.
Can I just add on to that? So just to piggyback off of a couple of things that Kirsty said, so part of why, so we did switch processors, but kept the rules of both processors have the same rules or the same guidelines of what goes in the green carts. What we have found though is one that there was some exceptions like egg cartons, it didn't really change the volume of material of compost that we were getting because most of what we collect in the green carts are food scraps and yard debris. So we simplified the guidelines to those big categories, and that is primarily what goes in those green carts. We don't get a lot of compostable packaging because we're not servicing commercial, restaurants, for example. We may get takeout containers that no longer can go in those compost carts, but on a larger scale, we mostly get food scraps and yard debris. We also found that as we expand the compost service, it is to so many people, to Christy's point, a lot of volume and a lot of new customers in a relatively short amount of time. It's a lot easier to educate two big high value categories like food scraps and yard debris, rather than saying to each individual household, this cup, not this cup, this cup, not this cup, because we don't have quite as much control or interface with our customers. So that's been a benefit. Another thing that's been beneficial is when we first started rolling out compost to all of our customers, we gave everybody a cart in the first area that we expanded to, unless you specifically said you didn't want to. If you didn't want a compost cart, we found a lot of contamination, unsurprisingly. So now we've switched to what we call an opt-in method. So you have to tell us that you want a compost cart, and then we will deliver it. So it's a little bit different than waste or more, where the access is required. We are giving the choice for you to participate, and that is how our ordinance is built. So we're saying we are providing you with the service and the financial incentive to use the recycling compost programs, but we're not going to require you to do so. And that has helped reduce our contamination significantly. Lessons learned.
So here's the second part of your question.
No, actually, no, that was a third, so. In regards to composting, you talk about yard waste, but then I heard you can't do grass clippings.
You can.
Oh, someone told me you couldn't.
Can't do sod.
Yeah, no sod.
No, this is not. Clippings, because we're told no. That's interesting, okay, because I did.
You're molding. Yeah, they will take it. You also don't have to, you can mulch your grass clipping as well.
Well, you use a monster that's
Yeah.
happen the way you want it to.
But we do accept it.
Okay, so the other statement, I guess it's a question, is, with these items that you can't recycle, what's the white stuff called? I can never remember.
The styrofoam?
Styrofoam. I don't even think it's time to see it. It's really that styrofoam. So why on the cart, this is for the undergrad phase, don't you give alternative places for things that cannot be recycled? That just irritates me, but like metal and things like that, it's no one in there. But then I don't know what to do with it.
So I'll that is a good point. I will say, easiest answer, we have a lot of that information on our website. Sometimes those programs changed. Those programs will change. And the carts don't change that often. So if we print something on the cart, we should be very confident that it is not going to change, which we've been finding with the compost cart changes. Because a lot of folks have compost carts that have compostable packaging saying that that's accepted. And now we don't really have the bandwidth to go around and swap those carts out. So styrofoam is one. There isn't really a strong recycling market. At times there have been styrofoam collections within Denver. At times there aren't. So if we were to print that specifically on there, it may or may not be true a year from now. So to the earlier points of like focusing on those really, really big categories that you're really confident about, it goes the same way with hard to recycle programs that can be a little bit more volatile.
Even the website, I've looked at the website, it's not always updated, it doesn't show you alternatives, so a normal human being that's interested in this, I would think would go to the website to be able to sign and look for information like that versus, I don't know what to do now.
Yeah, we do have a waste directory on our website and you can suggest materials to it. And then because we have a lot of materials programmed in there, we're not necessarily looking at that every day. But if we get that notification that somebody is like suggested that something is off, we can go in, that sort of triggers us to go in. And do that, and I'll take a look at our styrofoam. See how up to date that is.
Part of what we wrote the legislation for the producer responsibility program is to address what you're talking about. Denver's rules are different than Boulder's. Boulder's rules are different than Fort Collins. Fort Collins is different than Grand Junction. And the law states that the producer responsibility organization has to come up with a single list. These are the things that can be recycled in Colorado, and that has to be part of their education campaign. But to Nina's point about the styrofoam and to echo what Lori said earlier, there's also this trade-off of too much information results in zero action. And giving alternatives to everything for most people will be so much information that they don't see any of it. One of the great examples I have is I ran a recycle center and the signage wasn't up to me. And there was this bin that had, do put this and don't put this and do put this and flatten your cardboard boxes and da 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 da. And I repeatedly got calls of people standing in front of that bin, calling me and saying, there's nowhere to put my cardboard. And I was like, there is, and it says so right there. And I'd say, go closer. Okay, do you see that? Yeah, I see that. Do you see that? Right, so there's that balance of you want to communicate the most important information to the majority of people. That does mean that stuff will fall off the sides, and the styrofoam is an example of that, the metal. Our hope in this industry is that by streamlining the list, that will help make things easier, but that the people who care, such as yourself, you'll bother to go to the website, you'll bother to dig a little deeper, and that information is available.
Thank you. I appreciate you acknowledging that. But you don't think about it when you're struggling with it, you know, so, but from your perspective, it makes complete sense.
And if you want an easy way to feel good about at least a small portion of your styrofoam and other hard to recycle materials, Ridwell is now available in Colorado. We've got bins at all of our offices in our yard. It's just a little, kind of looks like an old style milk container. And they pick up certain things at every pickup. So plastic bags, multi-layered plastic, styrofoam, batteries, light bulbs, etc. And then every month there's a new category. So around Christmas time, it tends to be things you can donate. And then Ridwell has a warehouse somewhere. I still don't know where they're sending their stuff, where they then bale, agglomerate, etc., and send off these various hard to recycle materials to various remanufacturers. Sometimes it gets turned back into art, or it gets donated for clothing drives or toy drives or pet equipment drives, etc. So Ridwell, really great one. TerraCycle is kind of becoming outmoded because you have to send your stuff all the way to New Jersey to work with TerraCycle, but they were kind of the old dogs as far as dealing with your hard to recycle materials on a residential basis. And then like
Sustainability is another one.
Yeah,
They have
tons of
it's
drop-off
sustainability and drop-offs, and they have this really cool thing, a foam cycle container. It's in like a shipping container, and it processes the foam right there. It densifies it, and then it can be sent to market in an economically viable way. So there's no.
Because CAP manages so many properties, one of our members is Foam Cycle, and they are trying to get that equipment that sustainability has located at other locations. And so if you're finding as a property management company that perhaps I can connect you with one of our members where you might have a hub where you could choose to offer your residents to collect styrofoam like Ridwell, and then you would work with Foam Cycle and densify it yourself, and they will do all that at no cost to you. You have to provide the space, and there's a little bit of labor on your side, but they will make the infrastructure investment on your behalf to get that material back. So sorry.
And I wanted to quickly plug too, here at the Alliance Center, they have a hard to recycle station. You guys can go check it out at the end of this. It's at the back of this building. It has places where they will take your pens, they'll take your plastic bags, they'll take your dog food bags, they'll take styrofoam even. So I would encourage you guys to go check it out there. It is all donation based, so if you are gonna throw stuff in there, please keep in mind that it takes a lot of money to recycle tech. It takes a lot of money to recycle these things. So there's a QR code there where you can donate so that their hard to recycle center remains open to the public, because it is open to the public. But I would go check that out before you head out.
Awesome. Very cool. Okay, and do we have any more questions? I'm going to go online real quick and give them a chance and then come back to you.
Thank you very much.
Oh, yeah. Okay. No, we're gonna do 6.
Can somebody repeat that? It's cutting out online. Can somebody repeat that?
For in-person attendees, you got entered into a raffle for a compost bin, so we're just doing that really quickly before people have to head out. Okay, and the winner is Ray Reese.
All right. Okay, so I think about to give, I'd like to put down some people go from Fort Collins to be here to share with you guys. Really important, nonprofits, city, small business up here, giving their time. They have businesses to run every day, but this is really important to us, like really important. So we'll do our part if you'll do your part, which means talk to your neighbors, work with your management companies, and we'll try to make the infrastructure and options here better in Colorado.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all for showing up. Thank you all the folks online who came. These slides and the recording will be available tomorrow. I'll send out a follow-up email. Please make sure you either registered on the Eventbrite or you have given your email address to Emily, our lovely check-in person at the back. Because we want to make sure we get all of the information to those who want it. I'm especially interested in some of these grants that maybe we can, as a management company, collectively find solutions for our community. So we'll be in touch. Thank you all.